We're here with Coach Chad Prewett for part two of our leadership series, and we ended the last episode talking about inspiration and motivation and developing leaders and developing ourselves and raising our own lid so we can raise the lid of the others that we're leading. And what are some key takeaways from that last conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you start talking about leadership, and we kind of started with empowering others, which is really, really tough for a lot of leaders, investing in others, investing in yourself. So many times people give away more than they take in, so they run on empty constantly. So again, I'm 53 years old and I'm still investing in myself every day. And so the power of doing that is allowing people to get not just what they've always gotten from Chad Pruitt, but something brand new and fresh and creativity. Something we didn't really talk about the last one that's also interesting is the word fear. I think fear a lot of times robs you of creativity, and you can have fear as a coach. You can have fear as a business owner. There's a lot of fear can really come in, and you think about, the Bible has 365 times it says, do not fear, one for every day. How about that?
Oh, wow.
When it talks about something that can rob some of your creativity and your business and your team. And so, so many different things that we can build on. And I think, we mentioned stacking habits. We started talking about, doing those things we're getting 1% better every day. And it's something that I've lived by. I've lived by that long before anybody ever said 1% better.
Right.
I was trying to get 1% better. I just wanted to get better. I used to have a quote of the day that I wrote on. I did a practice plan every single day for 30 years. And we wrote on there the quote of the day. And on that quote of the day, one of the many, many times I would just say, get better today. Let's just get better today. What does that look like? We're going to talk a little bit more of that here in the coming hour here.
Absolutely. Well, I want to talk about the passion and having the vision and where you're going, right? So you guys had that, you had that when you were, coaching in high school, it was a championship, right? And then going to Auburn University to rebuild an entire program at an SEC Division I school. I mean, that's quite a task, right? And not only just trying to get better to win some in the SEC, but to go on to win a national championship and go to the Final Four and those things. And those are big goals. Those are big aspirations. And to see the program turn around in a decade as much as it did, talk about that and getting people on the bus that share that vision and understand it. Because I'm sure in the last episode you mentioned, like, people are probably looking at you like you're crazy. Like, we're going to win the SEC championship. You're like, you guys haven't won a game in 5 years. Like, how are you going to do this? So talk about setting that vision. And then how do you get people to buy into that vision and have the passion to pursue that journey?
Well, it obviously starts with the leader. It started with me. And so, I mean, passion is something I've tried to look. When I go into practice, I used to tell myself when I crossed that threshold of going into the gym, it was on. We were fun and games. We were cutting up before I went into, but when I crossed that threshold, I used to tell those guys, you make sure you have your shoelaces tied. And that is your thought process. When you tie your shoelaces, it's on. And so people would always say in high school, how did you keep them focused when you were beating teams by 30 points or whatever during the season, especially when we got rolling? We had quite the team and program. The last stop at Lee Scott, where we were beating people pretty good. We would have game goals. Okay. So I didn't care if we were playing the best team in the state or the worst team. We had goals for that game, such as we're going to have 15 deflections this game, or we're going to get X number of rebounds this game. And so if we had some of my players right here, they'd be breaking out in a cold sweat because I can remember one of my players one time after we had beaten somebody by, 48 points, I put the goal sheet on the door of the locker room, and beside it, they knew that every time we got a no, we ran a certain amount of lines the next day.
Oh.
And so we had just got through beating a team by 40 something points. And this girl is in tears. She's crying. And somebody says, we just won. What's wrong? We said, look at all the lines we got to run tomorrow. And so, like, I always wanted them to understand we're playing ourselves every day. We're playing against our potential every day. We're not playing that opponent. Our opponent is us. And so why did I coach just as hard at the end of the game as I did at the beginning of the game is because I was always looking for perfection. And I realized that can't happen.
Mm,
But if there used to be, if I aim for perfection, maybe I get excellence.
there you go.
Right. And so I wanted to be coaching the last person, number 14 on the team, 14th player on the team. It gets to the end of the game. I wanted to coach them just as hard as I coached the starter. That's how you build a program where everybody feels like they're a part of. And so those game goals allowed us, going back to what we talked about last episode, allowed us to stack those things on top of each other. And so you don't go from A to Z overnight. And sometimes, I always said it takes 3 years to really win a championship,
Mhm.
and you want to win before that. At Faith, I won in my second year, but if you look at Escambia Academy, we won a state championship in our third year. You look at Lee Scott, we won one in our third year. And then if you look at year 4 through whatever, we won several.
Yep.
And so I think it takes time to build it correctly. Now you see a lot of times in our world is with the transfer portal, people are just going and they're grabbing great players and you can win maybe for a 1 year time. I love what we did at Auburn, and I realize times have changed already. But I love what we were able to do at Auburn, and that is develop players. Coach Pearl loved to take someone who might have been overlooked, had a chip on their shoulder, showed up every day trying to prove to the world that they should have been a higher ranked prospect. Those are the guys you want. And then you inspire those and you get better every day. And, you take a bunch of guys in the tournament with a chip on their shoulder instead of feeling entitled, you got a chance to make a run, and we did.
I'd much rather be the underdog going
Yeah.
into those
Yeah,
situations.
me too.
And I can just, as soon as you mentioned that player type, I mean, several popping up over the last few years. I mean, like the tenacity and like you can't tell them they're not the best player on the court,
Right.
even if they're usually not, but they don't know that they've got that chip on their shoulder. So let's talk about again passion. That's one of our core values at Pruitt Pest Control. Love what you do and why you do it. Another one is excellence, and you actually gave this to me. This was probably 10 years ago, whether you remember this or not, but you gave me a quote, and I was probably struggling, probably came to you, crying about something. Nobody likes me at work, and nobody will do what I want them to do. And you gave me the quote. It was strive for perfection, settle for excellence.
Yeah.
So that's actually one of our core values at Pruitt Pest Control. And again, to build a program like you guys have done in all these different areas, over the years, but particularly at Auburn University, talk about, there was the vision, right? Now you guys had the passion, you and Bruce and the other coaching staff, you guys had passion every single day. So of course the team's going to feel that and the recruits and the fans, everybody, right? But talk about setting the culture and how you drove culture within the organization and not just on the floor, but outside of that. And like we were talking about, is developing people, caring about people outside of just where that ball goes in the hole or not. Talk about building that culture.
Well, when pressure hits all of us, what's on the inside's coming out.
Mm.
And that's a scary thought for all of us at times. And so when people talk about culture of Auburn basketball, and I'm talking about the last several years, it really was trying to develop them as the whole person. Again, we were recruiting really good basketball players. And so if the margin's really thin between second place and 15th place, and it really was, if you go back and look, there'll be a ton of teams that are 9-9 and, 10-8 and 8-10. So there's like a whole bunch of people. If the margin's that slim, can we win in the intangible area? The area that doesn't really show up on a scouting report, but just the guy's a winner, man. The guy, we used to talk about playing for somebody bigger than you. Maybe that's your faith in God and you're playing for an audience of one, but it also could be, I wanted to play for my brother. And I remember Coach Pearl many, many times saying, you know what, don't disappoint the person beside you. Maybe you're kind of feeling sorry for yourself on a certain day, but how about your brother? How about the guy who's in the trenches with you every single day that are sweating and trying to get better? Sometimes you got to play for somebody other than yourself. As we started building that culture around loving God and loving people and focused on others, not just ourselves, we're in a society right now where everybody feels entitled and they feel like they should already, they want to have the wisdom that I have at 53. They want to have it at 21. They want to have the vehicle. They want to have the beach house. They want to have everything instantaneously. And you realize as we get older that that comes with experience. And so how can we give those guys as much experience of developing them as a person as we can? I think about the amount of community service we did. If we can get their focus off of them and onto others and helping others, and it goes back to that loving deal, man. You can coach them as hard as you love them.
Right.
If they know at the end of the day that I'm going to love them regardless if the ball went in the basket, they got a better chance to succeed and a better chance to prove themselves, not only to myself, but to the team.
And that's such a, a different direction of just the mission of winning basketball games, right? Or in business, trying to hit a goal or trying to put money in the bank, right? Where does that come from? Where did you and that culture develop from to think like that? And I don't know if that's common, in college athletics. So, across all the different sports, I would say it's probably not very common in small business. Most business owners are just trying to survive.
Yeah.
They may believe in developing their people, but we get overwhelmed, right? You get overwhelmed the day-to-day grind. You get overwhelmed with the bills coming in or the fires you got to put out, every day. So how do you intentionally have that mindset? Because you agree with it, but then how do you go execute that?
Yeah, you know what comes to my mind when you first asked me that is, one of the things I talk about a lot, and that's be present where your feet are.
Mm,
If I'm talking to you, am I really present or am I thinking about the next 6 things I gotta do as soon as we get
right.
finished? And I think, you can't fool people. We say all the time, we can't fool our players.
Yeah.
They're gonna see who we really are. And so, I think taking the time and look, you only have so much of yourself to give away. So I'm not saying that you spend all day just giving yourself away because we've already talked about investing in ourselves and obviously got to run the business. There's a lot of
Mhm.
different angles to go at that. But man, people know if you really care about them. And I think it goes back to being present where you are. So in every area of your life, people would always ask me, how do you have such a great relationship with donors? How have you been able to help raise money? My wife, Tanya, started a ministry called Unite Us, and we're taking the gospel across the country and we're raising millions of dollars. And people say, how are you doing this? Well, it's relational.
Mm,
It's really relational. And people want shortcuts. They say, okay, now tell me the A, B, and C of how I can raise money or how I can do this. No, you do life with people.
yeah.
How did you get to know so and so? Well, I do breakfast with them once a month. I text them on, every few weeks and just ask them about their son. You know what their son's name? Yeah, yeah, I know their son's name, and I put that in my phone, so I got a little cheat sheet
Right.
there. But
Right.
but I'm constantly trying to find ways to have touch points. And so if I look at my organization, or if I will even go to my team, if I have a group of 12 to 15 guys, I'm looking for touch points for each of them to know them on a deeper level. For example, Chris Moore, who played for us, his mom was an accountant. I love talking numbers with him and his mom. So I would always ask, say, Chris, what's up? How's your mom? Because I connected with the mom. And I look back over the course of the time, Horace Spencer, which was one of my favorite players ever. But with him, it was like, okay, he's struggling in the classroom. How can I help you in the classroom? How can I help you get organized? Where you can be a better version of yourself and, from a long term goal. So I think people, you can't fool them. And so just be present when you have that opportunity to pour into them and let them know at the end of the day, you don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers, but I want you to know I care about you and I love you.
Absolutely, man. Man, you're kind of hitting close to home over here, man. This is uncomfortable. We're gonna have to do a little take here, split this up. I'm like, oh man, head all week. Man, I tell you that taking time to slow down, especially when you're goal oriented, where you go, 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 go. You got a hint of ADD, that probably doesn't help either. And it goes back to what you said in our last episode in part one about being still. Like that's what's resonating with me. Like taking time, whether it's end of the day or for me, it would be first part of the day because I'm usually in bed by 8:30. But, taking that first 30 minutes still, right now it's with a fire going in the mornings, and a cup of coffee and reflecting because if we just get up and go, 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 it's you look up and you haven't invested that time in people, even though you believe in it, right? So it's sounds like it's being intentional, right?
It's super intentional and I journal and a lot of really high capacity leaders I know journal and I know a lot of people don't, but I started journaling as a time to, okay, I'm going to read this out of the word and I'm going to write what I feel like God's speaking to me. And you know what? It's not always about me. It's it ends up being those people that's on my team. I end up
Mm,
thinking about, okay, because I was intentional and I was still, which a lot of people never are,
right.
and I gave myself 20, 30, 45 minutes to an hour, whatever time that looks like for you. I do believe that being specific with that helps you,
Mm,
so from 6 to 6:45, I'm going to spend this time being still. Just you'd be surprised what that stillness will do for your own soul. And then all of a sudden I'm writing down, hey, I need to reach out to Tim. Tim's going through something right now.
mm,
That's usually when I send my text messages, hey man, I'm praying for you. I know you're going through a hard time. That first of all, as a human being, that's what we're supposed to do. But that pays for itself over and over and over when you invest in people. It took me 4 seconds to type that out and send a text to somebody. Now that person knows that I care about them way more than just what they can do for me.
sure, absolutely. And that's really good. And again, I'm just thinking in terms of intentionality, and I think of people on our team or others that I know, and I think we have to commit to taking that time. And I go back to the example of, am I waking up at 6:45 when my alarm goes off and then rushing to get everything done to get out the door to get to work? Or am I willing to commit if we're going to try to do things with excellence? We're trying to do, the top 1% of that 99% of other companies aren't willing to do or want to do or have the ability to do. So we have to think differently. We have to act differently. For you guys, right? Having a program that you're starting from scratch, right? To go to the final four. I mean, you have to be willing to do things that no one else is willing to do.
That's
So, how would you encourage someone? So, maybe someone who is part of a team that aspires to do something special, but they maybe don't have those personal habits that have not been created, through a mentor or through a parent or someone in their life. Where would you tell someone like that to start?
Wow, so many thoughts there. I immediately think about, how I'm wired. I just recently did a gifts and strengths finders deal, and I've done a bunch of them over the years. And, man, I was kinda blown away, honestly. And I think I blew some people away who were assessing me too. They're like, "Oh, you're quite a human being there. Very high achiever, but some of the traits at the bottom, like empathy was toward the bottom." Well, part of that's just being a coach. But you know what? I married Tanya, who's the most compassionate, loving person I've ever been around. And so a lot of times people on your team make you better
Mm,
by allowing them to take their gifts and put it beside your gifts. And together we're able to conquer things. And so many times the leader, the business owner, the CEO, they're like, man, this is my deal. This is who I want. This is what I want it to look like. But we have the answers a lot of times right beside it. If
mm,
I can take my teammates, my folks in my team and say, look, we're going to do this together. I think one of the number one traits of leadership and the way I started, if I go back and look at all the years I coached, that I think broke the walls down to allow us to grow as a team was vulnerability. And so if I go into a room full of basketball players and I start off by saying, "Hey guys, I just want you to know, I'm struggling in an area," and I share that area with my team, what it allows them to do is to put themselves into my shoes. And so it also allows them to see that I'm not Superman. I might be the leader, I might be the coach, but I got my own stuff I'm trying to deal
mhm,
with. And so when I'm vulnerable, what I found out over the years is they become vulnerable. And when we share vulnerabilities, we grow. We don't grow by walking around talking about all the things we've accomplished in life. We actually grow. Growth's uncomfortable. It's always uncomfortable. And so we grow by exposing those things in our lives that aren't what everybody thinks they
right.
are. And I think when you have a culture, going back to that culture statement, that's what I wanted our culture to be, where we take the mask off and we say, this is who we really are.
Mm,
And when we take the mask off, we have the opportunity to say, we are looking at not just ourselves, we're trying to grow the entire team. And that's part of what we did. And I think vulnerability had a huge part of it. And that's not the manly thing to say, right? That's
right.
not what a lot of leaders are lining up this morning and getting ready to walk into a meeting and be vulnerable. But when you do that, I think you allow really, 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 really good growth in a short period of time. People say, well, how do you take the transfer portal and all these guys coming in
Right.
and in 1 year you do all this? And my first thought to them was, I'm still spending 12 hours a day with them. What do you mean? Maybe I only have them 1 year but I spend more time with them than I was spending with my family.
Mm,
I got plenty of time to develop them if I want to. So I don't think that's an excuse. I think we've got to learn how to, in a short period of time, find a way to get the most out of people.
And absolutely. And I think, again, going back to the word passion, if you're passionate and you're genuine and you're real, they're going to
Yes.
feel that.
Right.
Right. So let's shift gears a little bit. When we talk about passion, we've talked about two of our five core values, passion and excellence. Man, you're talking about, you said you're 53. I mean, I knew I
Woo.
thought you're about 20 years older than me, all that gray hair up there. But,
You are my older brother, so that makes
yeah, don't believe it. Don't believe the hype. He's got me about 7 years. But no, to go and build a program like you guys did, and then to kinda leave that on top, right? Man, people are probably, I'm sure you got 1,000 questions like, "What are you thinking, coach?" You grew up a lifelong Auburn fan. You're a Division One. You're on this team that's built something special, and now you're kind of leaving when you're on top. We just came back from the Final Four, like all those things, and so I can only guess you're here in a podcast studio in Auburn, Alabama with me. You're not on a yacht somewhere, so you still probably got some working years ahead of you. What kind of talk about what led that decision? Because I'm assuming there's a level of passion or maybe conviction to go do something else great. With these remaining years you've got.
wow.
That's a lot, huh?
That's a question that would probably literally could take an entire podcast for. But a couple years ago, I really felt like God was stirring me to do something. And he kept using the word eternal, something that's going to last forever. Not that what I wasn't doing, pouring into young men,
Sure.
is not eternal as well. And I thank God for that time. But I remember my wife Tanya comes up to me one day. It actually was the January the 1st of 2023,
Okay.
and she says, "I want you to pray a word with me this year." Well, I already knew what that meant. She was letting me know that, would you consider ever doing something outside of coaching,
Uh-huh.
because she knew 12 to 15 hours a day for all these years. She would like to see a little more of me, etc. And the word was anything. And I said, no, I'm not praying that word anything, because I knew where she was going with it. Well, a couple of weeks into it, I started praying that word anything. And literally, my prayer to God was, God, if there's anything else I could be doing that would bring more glory to you other than coaching, I'm willing to do it. If there's anywhere you would like me to be other than where I am right now, I'm open in my hands. The scariest prayer I've ever prayed.
And that's got to be uncomfortable.
Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
your comfort zone. You wanted to be a basketball coach from as long as I can remember.
21 years old, I wrote on a piece of paper, stuck it on, and literally before that, we probably could point back to some of those things Zig Ziglar or somebody spoke to. But I wrote on a piece of paper, stuck on my mirror at 21, that I wanted to coach basketball, college basketball. And listen to how specific I was. At one of two places, either Auburn University or Duke. So here I am living my dream. I'm in my 50s. I'm living my dream. I'm love. It doesn't feel like work. I'm going every day, working 12 to 15 hours a day, and didn't feel like I was working. But God had more for me, had something different for me. And so it took me 2 years. People say, man, it took you a long time to hear God's voice. It did. I was stubborn. But I knew for this time, and I don't know, I feel like I may get back into it at some point. I don't think it's forever. But I think at this point, and obviously with Tanya, with Unite, it was a lot of things that I could come in there and help her with. But I think it was, this is a strong statement, but I think God was asking me to redefine what a victory was, redefine the win.
Mm.
And what that meant was, I was always looking at the scoreboard to see if I won. But how do you win if there's not a scoreboard? How do you know you're winning? The world knew if Auburn University was winning. How do I know if you're winning? And so, what these last several months has done for me is just kind of recalibrated myself, and has allowed me to kind of get back into some of those habits that was once really passionate about.
Mm.
And what it's done is allowed me to become a better version of myself. And so, if I get back in to coaching at some point, they're going to get a better version, because I think this time that I've taken to. So it was a huge step, obviously, to step away from my love, my dream, my God-given goal that I really, really wanted to achieve. But it's really, really been good on both sides of things. And walking out when we did at the top allows you to feel a really good sense of accomplishment. And sometimes as coach, you don't even think about the past win. You move on to the
Mhm.
next one. And so, I remember Coach Pearl and I say on many, many occasions, we never really celebrated the first Final Four, because you don't. You're immediately talking about the next thing, and so hopefully, him and I can continue to talk about this last one.
There you go. Well, you can hear the passion in your voice of this transition in life, and it's got to be a scary thing going from that sense of security, and I'm sure over the years your income is raised as you guys have won more, and you've gotten to a network in this town and across the SEC, and that's leaving a comfort zone. I mean, it's leaving a comfort zone, and I compare to myself opening a pest control company, a little over 5 years ago when I had an Allstate insurance business same thing, you built it from ground up with nothing. You finally get to a place where you're like, that's where you want it to be. And here I am selling an Allstate business, that we're coasting. We're finally getting we're reaping the rewards of all that hard work. And people are like, why are you crazy? Like, why are you doing this? The easy thing was to stay there and from an income standpoint, we were in a good spot, but I wasn't passionate about it anymore. I was not passionate about that business, a lot because of the business model. And I just maybe needed, something new. And that was a big step out of a comfort zone, right? So how would you give advice to people that are maybe in a spot where they feel like they're in a rut? And that doesn't necessarily mean they need to change jobs or change industries or something like that. But we all find ourselves in those times, right? Peaks and valleys. So when you're in this valley, what are maybe some words of wisdom or something to share if someone's going through that, and how can they overcome that?
Yeah, I think about Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods, the greatest golfer that's ever played golf. If you go back and look at his career, early on, he had a lot of success, and then he did something really crazy, changed his swing, and people criticized him for it. And it took him a little bit of time to get used to it. But look at what he did the
Mm,
last 10 or 15 years of his career because he was in that rut. And nobody understood in the world said,
right.
why would you change your swing? You're already hitting it. You're doing all these things. But he was in that rut. He was in that place. And man, I think the great leaders understand that regardless of what everybody else is saying. They know, man, I've got to make some adjustments in my own life to do something at a level that's way more than even where we are right now, maybe even more than we've ever dreamed. And I think if you look at Tiger Woods' career, you would be able to say that risk he took, in the middle of his career to change his swing, paid huge dividends. And I think we all have to do that. And again, not to just continue to talk about the same things over and over. You can only do that if you're willing to take a self-assessment
Mm,
and realize, okay, you know what? I've been kind of faking it in this area for a while, and I need to I need to work on this. Along those lines, talking about going from good to great, and I kind of saw that even with, you selling that business allowed you to then turn around and focus more on the pest
mhm,
control. And I really felt like that was a big moment in your life from going from good to great. And so many times we work on our weaknesses so much. And that's not really how we coached when we were coaching at Auburn, especially. We wanted to take you from good to great. And so we wanted to, instead of focusing and spending 3 hours a day dribbling with your left hand and just becoming okay at dribbling with your left hand,
mm,
you're already a good shooter. What if we could take you from good to great? So we wanted to be elite in some areas. And it's even the way we recruited. If you look at the model that we use as recruitment, a little different than everybody else. We didn't try to go get 7 or 8 5 stars. You go back and look when we were really good. We got one or two really good. We called them
right,
pros. We wanted to
right.
get one or two pros, and then we put some people around them to complement them. But I think all that happens when you look inward at yourself, at your program, at your team, at your business and say, look, we are a little stagnant. So how can we get through those doldrums, that time where the wind's not blowing and you seem
Right.
not to hear any voices and nobody. And those are the times where I think going back to what Tiger did, I think you have to take some risks sometimes to do something a little bit outside of your comfort zone.
So how do you push others to reach their potential and to maximize that without breaking them? And then this may tie back into loving them. I'm assuming that's probably going to
Yeah.
pop in there somewhere, but how do you do that? Because when you're especially 12 to 15 hours a day, the pressure that you guys have had on you and your, prior to Auburn University that you put on yourself, right? How do you keep that momentum and that positive attitude and spirit?
It's not me, it's we. It's not me, it's we. It's constantly getting focus off myself and saying we. It goes back to the empowerment.
Mhm,
We are trying to do this. It's not my team, it's our team.
mm,
So collective ownership. Same thing with our players. Actively understanding that we all have a part to play in this. And we always said the best teams we've ever had are player led, not coach
mhm,
led. And so, how can I inspire those people on your team, on your business, our team as a basketball, to take ownership of that team, where it's not Rusty Prewett's business or Chad Prewett's team, it's our team. And I think to continue on that thing, I think they have to know your team has to know that you care about them more than what they can give you on that team specifically. And that means loving them. It really does. It goes back to love God and love people and serve others. And I think when we talked about a lot over the last couple of episodes, but when you start combining a lot of those things, that's how I've tried to live my life. I've tried to, I don't want to, I said that, I used to say this about my faith. People say, well, talk to me about your faith. I never wanted to have a faith hat on. In
mm,
other words, I didn't want to walk into a building and say, okay, I got to talk about faith here. It became who I am. People want to talk about, you know, teamwork and leadership. I don't want to put a leadership hat on. I want
right,
it to
right,
be who I am. I don't want to, I don't want to fool myself. I can't fool myself.
mm,
I am who I am. I am who I am behind closed doors. And that it comes back to my character, not my reputation. But my character is who I really, really am. And so, as I build on those things with myself, you're not going to have to always preach those things because people are going to see those
right.
things. You're going to live those things out.
Absolutely, man. There's a there's a lot there, man. That I mean, we could go in 20 different directions with that. And you talk about character, and you mentioned it earlier. Characters revealed in times of probably struggle and challenges. Everybody can do great things and have a good attitude when everything's great. When you're winning, but it's when you hit that low, when you go in that valley. What are some things that drive you when you go in your own valleys, right? Professionally, personally, how do you find that self-awareness to pull yourself out of that so you can then go be the leader in your family, in your household, on the court, and in your relationships?
Yeah, Coach Pro used to always say, adversity doesn't build character, it reveals character. And so we would always, and this is a good time to talk about it because Auburn just did this. But we would always have a schedule that exposed us. We
Mhm.
want to be exposed early because if I can get exposed in game 3 versus game 33, I've got a chance to work on that the rest of the year. And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't want to be exposed. They just don't. John Maxwell even talked about that. Even in the Law of the Lid, he talked about what do you think you are, and then ask your people around you what do they think your number
Uh-huh.
is. Maybe your lid number or
Right.
whatever. I forgot how he said it,
Yeah.
but basically, what do people really see in you? And I think what happens a lot of times, if out of adversity, teams can do one or two things. They can divide, and I've seen it, or they can come together and build a bond that does something that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been able to do at Auburn in the last several years is get exposed early and then build on that every single day, knowing that the end goal, I think you got to constantly talk about the end goal and they've got to see the vision. And so we're talking about the vision every day, every single day, the vision. And we may have that put up in our office or we may have that put
Mhm.
up in the locker room. They have to understand. I know when Yale beat us in the first round, you were there.
That was tough.
It
That was
was
a tough
tough.
plane
Yeah.
ride back, wasn't
No,
it?
nobody's saying a word. We get beat by Yale. We weren't supposed to lose that game, but we wrote that score on our board, and our team looked at it for a year,
Wow.
for 1 year. Yes, we wanted to move on, but we wanted them to understand the pain of what that felt like. And all that pain happens through adversity. So we go to losing in the first round to the Final Four. And so, we could have hung our hat, felt sorry for ourselves, whatever. We didn't make excuses. We owned it. We didn't go in the media and make excuses. We owned it. We got to
Yeah,
do a better job. We didn't have them ready to play that night. And I think all of that is born out of adversity. And
sure.
so many people run from adversity because they don't want to deal with it. It's difficult. It's not comfortable. But as we mentioned earlier, that's where real growth takes place.
Absolutely. So, talking about adversity and revealing character, through that adversity, I know for me, it's like, you've got adversity, but like, where do you know where to cut bait in certain areas, right? It could be a player or a team member you're investing in. It could be maybe a certain scheme when it, on the basketball floor, like, because we're stubborn, right? We're Pruitts. We get it.
Yes.
We got a long line of stubbornness in our bloodline, I believe. Where do you have that discernment to know when maybe you need to shift directions a little bit? Because if you and let me just hit pause on. I remember going from high school basketball. Now you're on the basketball court, and I'm seeing players come off the court cussing out the coaches, or looking and putting their finger in your face. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa! Chad Prewett's not going to have any of this. But like, it was kind of a change, right? So what does that look like when like maybe you need to hit a reset to maybe chart a different course? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And even going back to your visualization of those players walking off the court, we used to say there's a lot of difference between the first chair and the second chair on the bench or the third chair, wherever the head coach
Uh-huh.
sits. And there's a lot of, when you're the head coach, there's certain things you got to do and handle and you can't ignore. When you're in the second, third, fourth, or fifth, you're trying to continually teach to get to the end goal. And I can't tell you the number of times I just put I tell this story a lot. Bryce Brown comes in my office one day and for whatever reason, nobody was there. It was a late afternoon and everybody had taken off, but I was doing a couple of things and Bryce was back in town. This was after we had been in the Final Four and he had graduated. He sits in front of me and he looks at me and I look over and he's got a big old tear in his eye and it starts going down his cheek and he says, "Coach, why did you never give up on me?" He says it again. He said, "Coach, why did you never give up on me?" And it was one of the most thoughtful questions and deep questions I've ever had asked. And I immediately said, "Bryce, there was days I wanted to give up on you." And 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 what Bryce was saying, he said, "Coach, there was probably 10 or 12 times I was walking off the court and you came up and put your arm around me and you didn't try to yell at me and coach me. You just loved me." And it just reminds you of going back to being present where your feet
Mhm.
are and a different role. Now, if I'm the head coach, I probably can't do exactly what I
Right.
did that day. And so, look, you got to make some adjustments in life. And I think the counsel of others, there is wisdom in the counsel of
Mm.
others. And so I think sometimes, having some people that you trust around you, I've got friends that are coaching at other universities that I became really close with, and I'd say, "Hey, we're doing this, this, and this. What do you think about it?"
Mm.
I didn't call them for them to just to pat me on the back. I really wanted them to put some holes in it.
Right, right.
Tell me why this wouldn't work. And I think that's how you grow. And I never wanted to be the same. I constantly wanted to get better, and I think that's an inward. I realize a lot of that's inward motivation, and that's something about the way that we were probably raised.
Mhm.
But I think you can have a culture of those same things in your business or your team.
Absolutely. Well, man, we've talked about a lot of good stuff. I think I'm probably going to journal about 25 pages after this conversation, and I want my leadership team to listen to this and take something away. And if you were to give 1 to 2, maybe a kind of summary bullet points, so as it relates to leadership, what would be the top 1 to 2 points that you would want my team, your team, any team to sort of take away as we talk about leadership?
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about Abraham Lincoln as sharpening
Yeah.
the axe, and so I think about preparation. I used to have a quote: "Proper preparation prevents poor performance." The 5 Ps, and so like you can't fool people into being successful. It's literally preparation. So how can I get focused on what that preparation looks like? But I can have the greatest preparation, but if I don't love people and they don't really understand that I care about them outside of their performance, then when it gets tough and the pressure really hits, they're going to bail on you. And so, how am I going to get a team to walk with me? They got to know that I care about them outside of just their performance. And then being present every single day, understanding that, as I go through my day, I've got an opportunity to do those things really, really well
Mhm.
if I understand and get my eyes off on myself. And that's where others have to become part of it. And then the last thing is just invest in yourself. I mean, you
Totally.
look, that law of the lid's a real deal. They're not this organization, I don't care what it is, they're not gonna outgrow the lid of the leader.
Mhm.
So where are you at it? I think as you invest in yourself and as you grow and you raise that level of expectations, it's going to blow your mind to how far they will go if they see you're improving. And I think that comes with some vulnerability. I think
Totally.
that it goes back to saying, you know what, guys, I haven't been the greatest leader in some areas. And here's some things that I'm going to personally do to make sure that I improve. And what you hope happens is they look around and say, I want to do the same thing.
There you go. And that's awesome, man. Appreciate appreciate the time. Appreciate the words of wisdom. I can't believe it's taken us 5 years to do this.
Finally did it.
Yeah, we finally put it together, and you got all this time on your hand. I'm sure you're just sitting around idle, maybe eating potato chips,
Doing nothing.
You're probably going to go play golf right after this. I'm sure. Of course, it is about 30 degrees outside, but man, this is perfect timing to have this conversation as we literally go into a new year tomorrow, 2026. And so, thanks for your time. Thanks for your your sharing, and thanks for being a leader to those that you've led, your family, our family. And man, let's just keep doing some great things and keep from double bouncing me on that trampoline. I don't even, you're so old, I don't even know if you can get up on one.
I don't think I got that in me anymore. Yeah. I appreciate you having.
All right, appreciate it, Coach.